Hello and welcome to Slap on Location Part 2, where we take a look at the site of the NASCAR Cup Series last race on dirt, the North Carolina State Fairgrounds in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Welcome to Slap on Location, Episode 2, here at the North Carolina State Fairgrounds, the home of NASCAR Cup Series last race on dirt. Right over there, where those grandstands are, those are the original grandstands, still up today. They do tractor pulls, figure eight races, demolition derby, occasionally outdoor concerts and stuff. And the last race over here in 1970 was kind of just unceremonious. There wasn't any grand plan, no pomp and circumstance behind it. The schedule for 1971 had not yet come out. And it was just just so happened this was the last race. There wasn't any plan for it or anything like that. In Victory Lane, Richard Petty won the very last race. And he said he hoped they'd keep a few dirt races around, but he kind of read the writing on the wall and knew there was going to be fewer and fewer dirt races as the years went on. And he really loved dirt racing. He thought that a driver could get a lot more out of the car, whereas on asphalt it's more about the car and how that's set up and all the handling and everything. But on dirt track you can really hustle it, especially at this old racetrack, which is an old horse racing circuit built back in, I believe, the 1920s. He said there were a lot of potholes out here. It was rough. You kind of had to know the track, had to know the surface, and you could really hustle a car around here. There wasn't a whole lot of banking. It was a half-mile track. Going right through here is the turn one, and this whole pavilion right here where all these rides and attractions and concessions are at in this big circular area, that was the racetrack. The track was built as a half-mile short track, but by all accounts, it was very, very generous to call it a half-mile track. Maybe if you went all the way around the outside line of the track, it would measure half a mile. But it was a tough little short track, not a whole lot of banking. They only came here 3 times in NASCAR Cup Series history. Once in 1955, and then they took a long hiatus, came back in 1969, and then had the last race here in 1970. Junior Johnson won the first race, that was rain shortened in 1955. David Pearson won in 1969, and then in 1970, of course, Richard Petty won the very last race. A couple of fun facts. The 1969 race, David Pearson won that race, and him and Richard Petty finished 1-2 63 times in their career, which is the most of any drivers getting 1-2 finishes. And that 1969 race happened to be one of those races right here. In 1970, Richard Petty won this race, driving a car that he had sold to somebody, and then they used it for local dirt track racing, and then he went and bought it back, upgraded everything, raced it here, and then sold it back to the guy. Actually, he didn't sell it back to the guy, just gave it back to him. A lot of people say that he rented the car. He really just took it, upgraded everything, and then just gave it back to the guy. So if you had bought that car from him back in the mid or late 60s and then let him drive it in this race, it was actually a really good deal for you, because he's going to make that thing just about unbeatable. Of course, it would be unbeatable if you were as good as Richard Petty driving it around. In 1970, there were only 3 dirt tracks left on the schedule. 2 were at Columbia Speedway, and the very last one was, of course, right here at the North Carolina State Fairgrounds. Everything right here is original. The grandstands, the overhang to keep the sun off of people and keep rain off of you during a rain delay. Even the old red clay they have out here, that is the exact type of surface that they would have raced on. The North Carolina State Fair has been run just about every single year since 1850. This current location only came about during the 1920s, and of course this was originally a horse racing circuit. And fun fact, in that last race in 1970, Richard Petty started a few rows back, and at the start of the race, or early on in the race rather, somebody just gunned it straight into turn 1 over here. And there used to be a bunch of horse stables over here in turn 1 for all the horse races and everything. And the guy just gunned it, jumped over the barrier, went into the horse stable, and had to go pull the car out with a tractor out from the stables. Thankfully, there were no horses in there. Nobody got hurt. Guy was fine. But that must have been a pretty wild sight to see for the last race over here. This racetrack held anywhere between 10,000 people to 6,000. Everything around here is just sunk into a bowl. So you had the grandstands right here and the seats and everything. And then you just had hills where people would just set out blankets and just have a picnic and watch the race. So attendance figures were a little bit hard to estimate. As far as I know, the race was never held during the actual state fair, which always happens in October. They raced here, I believe, in May, and the very last race here was on a Wednesday afternoon in September, just before the state fair took off. Just behind the speedway is Wolfpack Stadium for NC State and their football program, and right next to that is PNC Arena, which is the home of the Carolina Hurricanes, the NHL team. Had they kept up the speedway and just kept racing here, maybe just paved everything, modernized it a little bit, kept it on the schedule, this would have been probably the craziest sports complex in America, if not the world. You'd have a NASCAR race here, you'd have NC State playing, you'd have an NHL team here, and when the Carolina Panthers were formed in 1995, or really just before that, there was some discussion about whether or not the team should be located in Raleigh or be located in Charlotte. And eventually they, of course, settled on Charlotte and built Bank of America Stadium over there. But had it been built in Raleigh and they built Carolina Panthers football stadium here, this really would have been just a crazy, just absolute madhouse, and really just a scheduling nightmare had they done that. The North Carolina State Fair takes place over the course of 11 days every October, and the turnstile attendance the last few years has been averaging around 1 million people, which is just crazy to think about. When we drove out here, we got stuck out in traffic for an hour before we even got anywhere near parking. We finally parked it, and then we walked all the way out here and sat in line for another hour trying to get tickets into the place. And so had the track persisted, I'm sure a lot of people would say, well, it wouldn't remain on the schedule because there's no way for that many people to show up for a NASCAR race. Well, there's easily 100,000 people all over the grounds here tonight, and they definitely could have hosted a NASCAR race had the track still been here. There's no question in my mind. If they can handle 1 million people coming in here across 11 days and at least 100,000 people per day, easily they could have had 40,000, 50,000 people show up here for a race once a year, or in the summer or in the fall, whenever they decided to have it. Of course, over here at the fairgrounds, you had the NASCAR track, and another big attraction over here that's still in use today is Dorton Arena right over there. It's about a 7,000 seat capacity or indoor arena. That's where they have all the concerts at. If you won, you'd go out here, have your ceremony out in front of the track, and then you'd probably go over there to Dorton Arena and party, be introduced to all the big wigs in NASCAR and all that. And if you're an aspiring musician, a country music musician over here in North Carolina, it's kind of a rite of passage that you have to go play over there at the Dorton Arena during the North Carolina State Fair.
So there it is, the North Carolina State Fairgrounds, home of NASCAR's last race on dirt for the Cup Series. If you ever get the chance to go through Raleigh, definitely check this place out. Hopefully the traffic isn't as bad as it was for us. Maybe try the second weekend instead of the first weekend when you come by. But yeah, there's so much food, just crazy stuff, fun rides and everything. So if you get a chance, definitely come out here and check it out. It's definitely well worth the $13 admission to get into the place, in my opinion. And so there it is, the North Carolina State Fairgrounds.
There's not too much left of the track, but the facilities still hear the sounds of mechanical thunder a few times per year. If you decide to visit the fair, I suggest you get there as early as possible and beat the traffic. Along with concerts, tractor pulls, and figure eight races, there are tons of rides and amazing food to enjoy, and all at a fairly reasonable price to boot. Me and my cameraman had a blast at the fair, and if you live in North Carolina, I think visiting the site of the last Cup Series race on dirt is more than worth your time. So until next time, y'all take it easy.